Hello, everyone. Live Audiophile Roundtable, the Future of Audiophile Reissues with Intervention Records. Good friend of the show, friend of mine, Shane Buettner, plus news and picks. Shane, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. Do I get to participate in news and picks?
You can participate in everything. This is your show. I did get a chance to listen to Joe Jackson the other day. Really love that album. Great job.
Thank you.
I know that's a Kevin Gray cut, and just so the folks know, digital, not analog.
Digital source. Yeah, it was a very early and interesting, like live to 2-track digital recording done on it was like a 3M system or something like that. In fact, there's a whole story about it on the back of the jacket.
Yeah.
So and they did it and sorry, I got distracted. The comments started flying by. I'm like, the dog.
Hello, Shane. That's from Christopher. Squirrel. Hi, Christopher. Yeah.
Yes, squirrel.
There's Michael. Awesome. Let's go. He says, oh, hang on. Shane.
Yes.
We didn't read this again. Hang on. Let me just have a look. We have there's Michael T and Danny SonicFlare Kaye as well. What?
Exactly.
Should we invite them in for a little chat?
I don't know.
So we are talking the future of audiophile reissues. I think having you on is a really good thing. So I really want to talk about, and you can sort of articulate to the folks about the processes, having your own label, what it's like to get it from the person, the artist you want, all the way to it being pressed. So I want to hear your words there. It's going to be fascinating. So let's bring in our other two panelists, Michael T. And then I'm worried about the next guy, Danny SonicFlare Kaye, only because it's really late where he lives. And I think he's using an IV caffeine drip. Let's bring him in and see if he's sleeping. Hang on. Where is he? There he is. Danny Kaye, how are you?
Wake up! Wake up!
Oh my gosh!
Wow!
It's guys again. What's up? Hey,
it's very late for you. And then we have the third wheel, Danny SonicFlare.
How
are you?
late is it? It's so late. My freaking watch went to sleep.
Oh my gosh! Well, thanks. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate 3 hours. I mean, we're sort of the West Coast gang here, all of us that we do this Audiophile Roundtable. But you guys had a lot of fun in Seattle, and I'm a little concerned too that you had Danny Kaye there, Shane and Michael. I don't think the folks of Seattle will ever be the same again. Am I right to say that? That must have been an experience for him, having a SonicFlare in Seattle, Washington.
Oh, absolutely.
There was a rumor of a major flare out in Seattle.
Yeah. I've copyrighted the SonicFlare out trademark, haven't I?
Oh, man.
No, it was fun. Good times. I really had a great time.
Yeah.
Meeting Michael the Greek for the very first time. He is as crazy as he looks.
He looks crazy? I don't think he looks crazy.
Hanging with Shane, with Pliny, with Ed, with Liz. Good times, good times.
Look at Patrick Lear. Hello, Shane. Steve, great timing as we've been wondering what intervention's got it coming near the future. I'm not sure if you can lay those Easter eggs out, but we can talk about it. I don't want that to happen if you can't, obviously. Well, which is interesting because I know you had been working on something last time you were on the show, and you're like all excited about it. And you're like, Steve, I can't tell you. And you're like, you texted me, you're like, good thing I didn't tell you. It didn't work out. So that again, the future of audiophile reissues. This is really good for the folks to know. It's not as easy as you think.
Should I tell them what we're doing? It's going to be Hawaiian audiophile reissues.
No.
In all seriousness, if I can get access to the Waikiki Records catalog,
you would do it?
I am crazy enough to do it.
Hang on, Shane. Yeah. The funny story. You want to know the true story of Slack Guitar Waikiki Records and how it was discovered?
Of course I do.
So this was years ago. I made an order on eBay. I don't even remember what the record was. Shows up, and there's 3 filler records that came along with it for free. One of which was the Slack Guitar.
You got to like fill out the packaging, right? So that the record.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it doesn't squish it and all that. I don't even remember the record that I originally had gotten. That's how useless it was. But the Slack Guitar record, I cleaned it up and I was like, whoa, dude. And it's been a hit ever since.
That's their inner sleeve, Waikiki Records. Look at that.
Yeah, look how cool it was. So this is no joke. So I went out to Maine to visit Danny. What was that, Danny? October, November?
Yeah.
And in this particular time period, I'd been listening a ton to the soundtrack from the movie The Descendants. And the most prominent artist featured on that is somebody named Gabby Pahanui, right?
Mm-hmm.
And basically listening to like a radio station Spotify made off of that music. And I get to Danny's and he's got this Slack key record and he's like, oh dude, like we got to play that. Like, and I played it up on his amazing rig and it was awesome. And I looked for it for months. I couldn't find it. And then Danny somehow found another one and managed to get it to me. And now we've infected Michael and Ed DeVito, our mutual friend, who I kind of wish was here too, because that's kind of rounds out the gang that we were running around with when Danny was visiting. But seriously, it's just one of those wonderful gifts because like it's simple recordings, so they couldn't screw it up too much, right? And it says something on there like recorded on the beach at Waikiki or something like that.
Yeah, recorded at the beach by Waikiki Records.
And it's beautiful, you know, and I've got great affection for that music from my trips out there where I'd listen to these radio stations with old Hawaiian folk music. And it's one of those just magic things. The music's wonderful. It sounds great. And these records that, like, to Danny's point, somebody thought it was just filler. And they're amazing. Like I've got volume 2 of Slack Key now. And brief, even some of us are thinking about getting a mono pressing to find out how it compares to the stereo.
So the next intervention pressing will be
I think we
Slack guitar, Danny.
Yeah, I think we single-handedly raised the value of all Waikiki records on Discogs
from $1 to $1.25, folks.
They're a little more than that.
They're more than that, man.
They are.
I didn't get mine for free as filler. Let's put it that way.
Well,
But
they're
Steve,
now up.
to answer your question, like, what's new with intervention is a short conversation.
Okay.
It in our little pre-show, this came up. It's really true. It's definitely not getting easier to get deals put together. It was never easy. There are bigger labels that have a lot more resources and big businesses behind them can throw money at that stuff. That's not me. And it's difficult. And I had, aside from the title that we talked about last time we were here, that I actually did put many months of actual work into before it just became, very clear that the artist I was working with and I had very different ideas about how a reissue should sound. And then another one that also fell through. And I got to tell you, the dance card isn't busy enough these days that it doesn't hurt a lot when not one, but two for a given year fall through. So, but that's a sad truth of what happened. That being said, I am directly working right now with another artist, and for reasons that you just illustrated perfectly, I can't talk about yet, but I feel great about it. We're getting along. We've got our ideas about what this is going to be are very much in sync. It's a very unique project, and I'll just say that it's an artist that has got direct ties from where I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I think we do it. It's going to be a really fun record. The artist I'm working with is an absolute delightful person to work with, and so far it's just been great. So I think that one's gonna fly. I'm gonna.
So all the Hoffman form is it's not going to be Led Zeppelin.
Shockingly, no. The days where you can get Led Zeppelin master tapes and have them piled up outside the mastering studio for 6 to 12 months.
Didn't that happen with Bernie? I think Bernie Grundman made that comment, didn't he? At some point?
Neither confirm or deny, but everybody's heard that, and I think it might be
I've heard that. I think it came from Bernie's lips from one of the videos he did or interviews at one point.
Well, you know what? If Bernie's talked about it, then maybe we have permission. But yeah, that's not the only one. Those aren't the only. I know people. I've seen pictures that friends took of the Kind of Blue tapes when they were still around.
The 3-track master stayed around for years at his place, from what I heard. Nobody picked them up.
I've seen, just to talk about the process, right? Yeah. So if something's done in LA, like with Kevin or with Bernie, get brought over by courier, and then they schedule pickups. And seriously, sometimes to this day, the mastering guys have to call the studios and remind them that they've got tapes that they need to come pick up. But the general process is that they give you a few months anyway, because you do have to get through test pressings and everything and make sure that you don't have to do recuts, that a lacquer doesn't get destroyed or something weird. So it is a process where they expect it to be a couple of months.
So the title of the show today, The Future of the Audiophile Reissues. Danny Kaye, you've got a few albums there around you somewhere in that man cave of yours. I think you do. Now,
he's got an amazing record collection.
Well, and he's already
wandered around there for days.
He unloaded a bunch on the Danny Kaye collection on the High Fidelity Records website as well. So I'm surprised he has anything left. But Danny, I was going to ask you.
Damn thing.
Danny, I was going to ask you. I mean, in terms of and I want Shane to talk about it as well. But from a consumer standpoint, Michael as well, where do you feel the future of audiophile reissues are going? I mean, we've seen a real spike in vinyl over the last 4 or 5 years. We all know it's now selling more than CDs. Now I'm seeing videos where CDs are back in vogue. Then I can't keep up with all this. I mean, I don't know if that's clickbait or not, but I don't believe that CDs are going to be outpacing vinyl going forward. I don't see that at all. But where do you see it, Danny, as a consumer going forward? Do we still see it's a viable market going forward? And do you think it will continue that way, or is it going to get a little bit tighter?
I think, funny enough, Shane and I talked about that. What a surprise. When I was out in Seattle, and I think what's going to happen is there's going to be more focus on specialty releases. I shouldn't say specialty, special releases, probably the better word. What do I mean by that? First of all, it's well known. There's 2 big guys outside of all the 3 major labels, Kassem and Davis of Music Direct, that have put down cash and hold a ton of these titles almost for ransom, right? Nobody else can get to them. If AB wants to reissue, whatever title, and either Kassem or Davis have it in queue, guess what? It's not going to happen. Shane, same thing. And so one thing that I thought was really interesting is, Analog October Records, sort of very similar in the vein of what Shane did with Intervention Records, which is a small-time label. Craig Crane, the founder, we became buddies through my channel on YouTube, and he pinged me, I don't know, probably 4 years ago now. Hey, what's up? Love your videos, let me send you an Analog October t-shirt. And at first I had no idea who he was or what he was doing. He has a record store called Analog October Records in Chichester by the Sea in the UK, and he sells records, right? Well, lo and behold, like every nut in this hobby, he's like, dude, I'm going to start reissuing records myself under the Analog October label. And my first question was, well, what titles are you going to go get? Because you're not going to get any titles. And so what does he do? He reissues, very similar to Shane, titles that are off the beaten path, with some exceptions, and titles that he likes and enjoys listening to, which in Craig's case is mostly 70s jazz, UK jazz and prog jazz. And he's doing really well with it. I mean, he just came out with his second title. And it's I think that's the future. I think it's Dan Fogelberg, Impex Records, it's Everclear with Shane, Joe Jackson, obviously. and some of the stuff that's lesser known that you can get your hands on in
the church. That's a great outreach.
I like, and that's the thing about some of these bands. I mean, Shane, obviously, Intervention Records did the church. As an audiophile, these are the type of bands I think need to be reissued, get more exposure, because I mean, really, we're tired of listening about talking about the Beatles or the Rolling Stones and all the the Led Zeppelins and the Pink Floyds. I mean, they've done a million reissues already. Let's get something new. Really diversify our listening palettes, as I like to say, and go out there. And Michael's showing a bunch of the stuff that Shane's doing. It's very, Shane, that's one thing about the Intervention Records label. It's very diversified in terms of the musical preferences, which is really cool.
Yeah, and to be fair, I never set out to have a small label. I actually wanted it to get big. and also too, I mean, look, a number of these artists, including Everclear, the Songs from an American Movie sold the least of the 3 Everclears I've done, but it sold 1.5 million copies on CD back in the day. Billy Squier sold millions of records. These are not small artists or small records. Gilded Palace of Sin could be, but I mean, I think the Burrito Brothers got into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame a few years ago. So, but I think the broader point, though, is that compared to like Led Zeppelin or like, let's face it, right? Like, I mean, I can't tell you how many times, yes, it'd be great to get U2 and then follow that up with the Beatles. But like that's the kind of stuff that, simply is that there are certain things that are just untouchable no matter who asks for them, right? For one reason or another. I always wanted to try to, fill the void that classic records left behind. I thought they were a really compelling label in terms of repertoire. And in particular, I was very enchanted with the fact that they did a lot of 90s stuff that I thought was great. And even though I ended up doing some stuff from the 70s and stuff, I really have always had an intention of doing stuff from the 90s and the 80s that I thought really deserved a new spotlight, right? Like, I mean, the Everclear albums are among the very first albums I ever asked for. From the very first emails to Universal Music back in the day. So on the other hand, I was always, willing to, go after anything that like I liked and had, really some kind of connection with. When I grew up, my uncle, introduced me to the Flying Burrito Brothers. And even though he introduced me to like the later kind of later era stuff, as soon as I got old enough to find out who Graham Parsons was, I went back to like the Flying Burrito Brothers, and really, and that's how. And then I ended up also doing, finding Gene Clark and and Judy Sill. So some of those have been off the beaten path, but I mean, Joe Jackson is somebody who sold millions of records, and I've done extraordinarily well with like those titles. Billy Squier, Matthew Sweet. I mean, hell, I did a Marsha Crenshaw record. There are so many records that I did in the first 3 years that would have done so much better now as the labels matured, quite a bit more. So, that's another thing that I would say, and something that's worked out well for me is whenever I can, I go to the artist first. And that tends to grease the skids quite a bit, when you go to the labels and you start asking for deals. And I've been very, and again, Everclear came because I'd done such a good job with the first 2 Everclears that I did. Art asked me to do it. Mm-hmm. I love it when it works that way.
The Frampton box set.
What's that?
The Frampton box set.
That was actually, I mean, I think I might have talked about this last time. That was the craziest thing. Somebody who follows me on the Steve Hoffman forum said they knew Peter's manager, and that because he'd love to do reissues. I basically went, I've heard that a million times. Hey, I know somebody and they know a guy in a band and they all want to do really high quality reissues. And the reality is like they either don't know him as well as they think they do, or they don't really want to do anything. Or they say, talk to my manager, and the manager, Peter's manager was absolutely delighted, and they absolutely did want to do something, and we did, and it was great. Yeah, but that's a perfect example. It worked great, but I do try to go through the art, and that's another route where I've had things go sideways. I mean, a lot of times I've reached out to the artist after I have a deal in place, and there's a catalog. I got a green light on a title that I would love to do, have wanted to do for a long time. Did all the tape they had tapes, master tapes. Everything was great. Reached out to the artist, and man, did that person not want to have anything to do with the reissue? Was very aggressively against it, and has a very vocal social media following. So I'm like, I can't go out there and have the artist speak out against my reissue. So I had to cancel a deal that I had in place, because the artist, for a variety of reasons, just didn't want to participate. So these, and all of these things are so, I am still a fan, and I get my hopes up, and I get very emotionally involved, and it's very difficult when these things go sideways. It's very deflating, because let's face it, most of these albums I do because I want the best version possible, for myself, first and foremost. So, it really pains me when these things, go in a different direction.
So that's a question then too. I mean, going forward, finding tapes now for different releases. I know someone had asked you that. Here we go. Are you finding it more difficult?
No, tapes are still good. Everybody knows about the event that shall not be named, as everybody calls it, but everybody knows there was a fire and it involved a prominent label and roster. And all I could say is I've just been so incredibly fortunate, because I've done so many A&M titles. In the 90s, they made half-inch safety copies. They sound amazing. And I've used those for I think all of the A&M releases that I've done on my label, including my upcoming Joe Jackson Night and Day, which has been in print before, but is finally coming back.
Killer.
Great record.
Question for you, Shane. Is that the reason why the Billy Squire says artist approved? Because you have a lot of that on your.
I do. Whenever
this is artist approved too. Stephen Kilby, artist.
Yeah, Steve Kilby. I got Steve Kilby's sign off on that, and I was actually connected to Steve through one of the other guys in the band. Whenever I can, that's my preference. And like I said, that's a thing that has changed a bit over the years. Is I would say these days I actually try to get to the band or management first and then go to the label, versus the way that I used to work when, it was a little more straightforward to get deals put in place. I get a deal put in place, and then I would go to the artist. In Billy's case, and the pitch always goes like this, like, hey, I'd like you to be as involved as you want, or as little as you want. Like, you could, first of all, I don't think you'd be doing this if you didn't totally trust me. And I send people care packages so they could see the care that we put into the art. I talk about the mastering. I talk about, what my approach to reissues are and how I'm going to handle their music and stuff. And some people, like Matthew Sweet, love what he heard in terms of like how I was going to do it. Was very gracious in giving me permission to spread, the repertoire, especially Alter Beast, over 3 sides for the best sonics, and signed off and everything. But then he did have, I worked with his management team, and they got me artwork and stuff like that. But Billy was one of the ones. He's an absolute hardcore audiophile. He's got a very serious stereo system. He's got a go-to copy of Don't Say No from the 80s, and he absolutely played it and had to know that my version was the definitive version before he'd sign off. And I'm happy to say I did get that sign off. Peter approved everything, every aspect of the art, the hype sticker, like you name it, everything went across Peter's desk. And then he and Chuck Einlay, his engineer, played and approved the test pressings. So, but yes, whenever I can, Joan Armatrading, I reached out to Joan's management, and there's no animosity, there's no ill will, but she was offered the opportunity and chose not to. I'd actually love to do more Joan records, so I might reach out and find out if she's got more interest in the future and doing a couple more of her releases, because I think another couple of those would be great.
So it sounds to me, sorry, Michael, it sounds to me that, in terms of the future of audiophile reissues for Intervention Records, there's a lot in the oven, a lot in the pipeline for you currently, or a lot of ideas maybe?
Yeah, well, let's say this. I'm actively working on something right now. There's a few things. There's one thing out there that there's a tentative agreement with an artist management for something that would come, and then always chasing. Then I'll say this, compared to a few years ago, managing and working with and dealing with extensions on existing stuff is a touch more involved than it used to be.
VQR is asking this, Shane, are 80s and 90s titles actually harder to license than older titles? I personally doubt it. Is it that much harder, and more so just an unwillingness by most audiophile labels to pursue anything past 1980?
Well, so here's the thing.
You smile at that one. That's funny.
Well, here's the thing. So everybody I know says and believes some version of what you said earlier, that we should, stop focusing on the same 10 reissues that keep getting done over and over. And there should be some new stuff. I put out new stuff all the time, and audiophiles are like, I don't like that record, right? Like Everclear Songs from an American Movie. That sold 1.5 million copies. It's a terrific record. I went back. What they had were piles of analog tapes that had never been compiled into a master because it was the CD era, right? So when you have master tapes, the process is you'll have master reels of all the songs, and then they have to be compiled into a double-sided single 33 record. It needs to be an A side and a B side. That's what the master tapes are. Will always be 2 tapes, right? And if there's more songs, it might be 3, might be 4. But for a single-sided 33 like that, so with the help of these great guys at Universal Archives, my guys Chris Walk and Kevin Reeves, we went back to those piles and piles of analog tapes. We went back to the original engineers and found out which were the masters and which were not masters, and we made a brand new set of analog master tapes for a title that came out in 1999 or 2000, whenever that was, and put it out on vinyl. And the audiophile market couldn't care less. The bigger audiophile review sites didn't review it, and they weren't. Now, I don't need the audiophile per se market for Everclear. We did 2,000 of the yellows, and I've already run through that, and another 1,000 of the Coke Clear version. So and let's face it, in the premium reissue market, if you can move 3,000 copies of something in 6 months, that's a monster. That's a great selling title and a great record. The audiophile market, who wants new stuff, care less. The reality is, you go release another Kind of Blue, they'll go onto a forum somewhere and they'll talk about it for the next 8 months.
Michael, you had a question. Sorry, I interrupted
yes,
you.
I'm going to go back to this. So you mentioned that Billy had a go-to copy of Don't Say No, right? And my curiosity is, before your awesome Kevin Gray all analog cut, what was Billy Squire's go-to version of Don't Say No?
So that's a funny question, because I think I mentioned this last time, and I think I was wrong. I thought it was an 80s mo-fi, but there apparently wasn't an 80s mo-fi. And the quick answer is I don't know, and I'd have to ask.
But you know what I found out? There was an 80s promo-only half-speed cut by Stan Ricker.
I'll bet you dollars. I wouldn't be that surprised if that was, because it was now again, I did that title probably back in 2017 or 18. So my memory may not be what it was.
Yeah.
I don't think it was the US I don't think it was the standard issue US, because
and the standard US was George Marino at Sterling, I believe.
Nothing to sneeze at either.
No, not at all.
No, but again, we got the master tape that wasn't a safety copy or anything like that, and me and Kevin being in the studio and his incredible chain. I mean, I'm so proud and happy of that record. And like I mentioned last time I was here, that record's got a bigger footprint in my own youth probably than anything else I've ever done.
Me too.
In the Everclears, I was so into those records as an adult, stuff like that. But Billy Squier and AC/DC were what I played the snot out of when I was 11 and 12 years old. So
80, 81, yeah, those years.
So Billy Squier, the Don't Say No Billy Squier, 1981, was originally mastered, if you have the OG, by George Marino.
Yeah,
and I'm sure that would be awesome. I'm super happy with that.
And that was the year that they followed up Back in Black AC/DC with For Those About to Rock, I believe.
I think that was it. Well, wasn't
right around the time.
Yeah, 80.
1980, and then I think For Those About to Rock was next. Yeah.
Well, one of the things we got on a record store spree, I got a pristine Robert Ludwig Back in Black.
Fantastic. Yeah, that sounds awesome. An RL.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the RL.
Yeah.
Did you get your copy of the church? The church.
It's late there in East Coast, so just be patient with Danny.
I know. She sells Sanctuary.
The Cult.
On the way.
On the way.
The Daymont A1B1 UK pressing.
Dude.
Just to give you an idea, this is like a typical day in the life of somebody like me. So my girlfriend and I are cooking in the kitchen. Nielsen comes on. I'm like, oh man, like, okay, I got to pull out Nielsen Schmielsen. So I pull it out, and Nielsen was a cool cat. He recorded in London. And so the UKs are kind of the go-tos. And I looked, and I've got a US pressing, a US Dynaflex, the much maligned, but to my ears, almost always great sounding Dynaflex.
Dynaflex, I mean, I think there's consensus. We all really appreciate the sound of those Dynaflex.
I always hear people saying the joke because it's the one that's just so.
Yeah. I love making the noise. You can sort of go like with it. It's great.
Yeah. And so then the next thing I know, I'm on Discogs tracking down a UK copy. And it turns out the mastering lab cut some lacquers for a UK copy. For one of the first UK presses.
So let me stop you right there. So the mastering lab, Michael, is a all tube cutting.
Yeah, lab, and it still is now that Chad owns it. Yeah, that we had who was it on? We had him on, the mastering engineer for the
Matt Luthens.
Matt Luthens, yeah. And he said it took him about 5 to 6 years to restore everything because there was no documentation. They had to reverse engineer everything. It was all tube.
So when you see the mastering,
that's actually another thing with every mastering chain. The mastering engineer himself is the wizard who builds it, maintains it, and keeps it up and running. Kevin built all of his stuff. He built his speakers, his amplifiers, the whole thing.
And that was Doug Sachs, right?
Doug Sachs had a brother who was apparently a genius, and they built that. And that's why when that got sold, a number of people were like, okay, well,
good luck.
Hold on, I have a question then. So Doug Sachs was involved with that Pink Floyd record back in was it the 30th anniversary EMI cut? So would that be an all tube cut then?
That was cut at ATM.
Oh, it was. It wasn't. It was Kevin. It wasn't.
It was both of them. It was Kevin and Doug.
But was it cut with Doug Sachs's equipment?
No, it was cut at ATM.
Yeah,
darn it.
Doug had it. Doug's lathe was put up for quite a while. He didn't cut vinyl for quite some time. But I didn't know that it was a tube cutting system. That's interesting.
You know what else I found out? For a while in the 70s and early 80s, the mastering lab was actually selling speakers. They went into the market selling products too. I've seen them on Reverb.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah,
they're supposed to be very brilliant guys, and obviously, those old Sheffield Labs directed discs with the LA Philharmonic, which my former father-in-law actually played on those records. He was in the LA Phil at the time. You are a straight up man if you're willing to record an orchestra directed disc and get it a whole side at a time like that.
More fun facts. Matthew Lufin shared with us a few months ago. You know how the TML stamp is in the dead wax? TML-M, TML-S were
different lathes.
Scully lathes, and TML-X was a Neumann lathe.
Oh.
Yep.
Yeah.
So here you go, Shane. The OG Billy Squier Don't Say No mastered by Marino is excellent sound, but AI Surfer saying it's got some compression. Michael's shaking his head. Do you agree with that, Michael? Do you know?
Well, a lot of 80s records had some compression because they weren't made for audiophile turntables. They were made to play on people's Sony Technics Kenwood rack systems, right, Shane?
Even in the 70s, they had analog domain limiters.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the second Steelers Wheel album that I did, that very noticeably had some analog limiting. And you could really, especially in Kevin's rig, you could really hear the effects that has on the soundstage. It really tightens and focuses things and pushes them at you. And then you go back to hearing the tape and the soundstage just totally expands. And he's 100% correct with absolutely no compression or limiting of any kind.
And so that's the one thing about, because there's that argument. Why do I need a reissue, Shane? I can buy the original for $5.
So I had a conversation with somebody about that just today. And boy, is that an interesting conversation to have. Limiting and compression is one of them. Because that is something that's been in very frequent use, at least since the 70s, right? Like that's what I've got some direct experience with hearing, originals and then listening to the master tape. But, it's a lot more than that. It's possible with premium labels, or at least, people who do what I do, which is I tell you everything, about the sourcing, like what did we use? What did we cut it from? Where did we cut it? Who was there, who made the decisions, why did they make the decisions that they made, right? So in my case, I'm very straight up. I go into the mastering studio. I always bring whatever I believe is the best sounding version of an album, or two, if there's more than one credible version, as a just in case, as a reference. But the first fork in the road for any reissue label is, are you going to make what I call a wax museum replica of some previous pressing, or are you going to go after what's on the tape? Now, again, with some mind toward, you don't want what you do to be unrecognizable to people who love an original, right? And I've been fortunate there's never been one where I just thought like, Jesus, this sounds amazing. Like my Joe Jackson Looks Sharp has got way more, the tape had way more bass on it than they'd ever cut into that record. And we were able that, on Kevin's chain with, today's gear and everything, we were able to get all of that without losing any of that drive and grit. Now that's the digital one, but like I'm particularly talking about Look Sharp, which is a very punchy, gritty new wave record. That bass was able to express itself without losing any of the edge that record had, for example. So that's kind of the first fork in the road. But that's really the biggest thing, because when you listen to an original, you don't know what the source was. It could have been a cutting copy. You could be 2 or 3 generations away from a master tape easily. It could be an EQ'd cutting copy. You don't know if it's, maybe it's Dolby, maybe it isn't.
It's not the hot stamper.
Somebody flipped the wrong button, right? Or you don't know that happened. The other thing that's very famous, right, is like, speaking of Robert Ludwig, RL's name came up earlier. Some very famous instances, Led Zeppelin 2 and some other things where somebody else decided there was too much bass or it was too dynamic a cut, and somebody in QC said it's making the needle jump out of the groove in the Kitty stereos, and somebody else might order a complete re-EQ and recut, and you have no idea what that is, and then you get into the fact that now you're into really boutique record your point about hot stampers, when you're replacing the stampers every 500 units, there's no hot stamper. You're well within the tolerances. I mean, I challenge anybody. I mean, let put it this way. For me personally, I could get the first copy that comes off the presses of every record I've ever gotten. I have never bothered. And in case somebody's wondering, I don't play my test pressings. I have them. They're most of them are down in the basement. I play the production records. They sound amazing. I never even give it a thought. I don't pull a special copy for reviewers or for anyone else. So that's the argument that I personally have in favor of reissues, is when they're done right and the people are transparent about how it's sourced. You know exactly what you're getting and why. And, when you come to trust the label, you can believe, I can't speak for an original, but like what I can say, I've done a couple of records that I know the originals really well, obviously, like the first Steelers Wheel that was cut by the great George Peckham. When we did that record, we had George's mastering notes. So we saw exactly what George did. And guess what? If we punched in George's EQ, we could have made a record that sounded just like the UK original. Now, what's interesting about that is that what George did, they put so much bass on these tapes, it's mind-blowing. George cut a ton of bass, pushed a little at 3 and 4K, and then again at like 10 or 11K. And it's it's no compression on George's original cut. Amazing, and it sounds great. Now you play ours, we had to cut the bass too because there was so much bass, but we didn't cut nearly as much as George. And we didn't feel the need to push the mid-range or tickle the top like that. It expressed itself beautifully. If you listen to our record, it's fuller bodied. You don't have that same impression of the top end, but that's not because the tapes lost air, and it's not because it's not that the top end is not there. It's that we didn't tickle that very top, and we didn't. The biggest thing though is that whenever you cut the bass, you change it or add or leave more bass in, that affects your perception of the mid-range. A lot of your perception of the entire spectrum is based around what happens in the mid-range. And you have less of an impression of the treble. The treble isn't as pronounced when the bottom end is fuller. And the same thing happened with my Joan Armour trading. The originals are great. They are a little more, you notice the top a little more. Some people say, well, maybe the tape lost its sparkle or this or that. The tape didn't lose its sparkle. I'm saying, like, I heard Jones, I heard the tapes and they sound full and warm and gorgeous. And we made one that sounds more like what's on the tape. Now, to your point, then you start getting into what people's preferences are. If you can find a clean, quiet, copy, and you prefer a sound, like both are totally credible. But I will stand by what we deliver in terms of you're going to get a dead quiet, flat, on-center record where they didn't run the stamper until the stamper fell apart, which is what they used to do when it wasn't a boutique process the way it is today, instead of replacing the stampers every 500 units. And that to me is in the consistency, among other things. I could definitely say, with my records, I'm really giving you as close of an experience you can get as to what's on the tapes as you could possibly get. And one guy made the decisions based on that. Nobody made any decisions based on what might happen on lower quality stereos.
So I think the real argument now is, like, I already asked you, why should I buy a reissue versus an OG? But here's another thing, why you should buy a reissue, because the equipment we all have today is so much better than it was in the 1970s or 1980s, etc. So, and the mastering, the chains is all better now.
Yes.
So you're taking advantage of that all the different technologies to get the best sound. That's why these reissues are priced the way they are as well.
Well, let me say two things about that. So definitely, people who follow this know this isn't a dirty secret, and Kevin would say it too. Over the last 10 plus years, Kevin has made 2 noticeable upgrades to his chain, and his records sound better. So, and a lot of people know that.
We talk about it all the time on the show.
Exactly. So that's a perfect example, let alone from where it was, 40, 50 years ago, right? But that's the biggest thing, is that now that it's not the ubiquitous format, the advantage of that is that we can do really wide open dynamic cuts with full bass expression without worrying about, listen, I still run into, because I do sell popular records. I sell them on, I sell on Amazon, and I sell through artist web stores. With Peter Frampton's Frampton record, the one with the squawk box, Show Me the Way. There were people who's really, you get down to Crossleys and things like that. I have definitely made some records that people who are using record players like that may not be able to reliably track. And it's so hard to convince these people that there's nothing wrong with the record. Oh, no. But all the other songs play fine. I'm like, I know. All my other records play fine. I know. And they think again, I totally understand the mindset of like, all my other stuff plays fine. It has to be your record. And I'm like, I know this sounds strange to you. I hear it, every few weeks. Like, it's a very frequent thing. But we are allowed to do them wide open. Every cut can be a hot cut. And that's awesome. Now, in terms of the expense, that's a little, the bottom line is that as a third party, there's just a lot more expense involved, because we have to pay royalties and publishing and a lot of stuff. It's very expensive. I always say this: I can make terrific records. I can't make cheap records.
So that's an argument you read in the forums, all the the Hoffman forums. Reissues are so expensive. These these companies are making so much money. I mean, there's probably a large percentage, I'm going to assume, licensing is going to be the biggest expense that you're dealing with as a third-party reissue.
Let me tell you for real, if records had a traditional multiplier of 5 to 7 times, which is what a traditional cost of goods to retail sales price is, that's very common in anything that involves produced goods, right? And all of that, these records would cost between $75 and $150. The market prices get set. And all I could tell you, like, to give an example, well, I mean, look, I talk about this stuff all the time. I mean, when you're talking about doing like even these like single pocket gatefolds, right? From somebody like Stoughton, those things in quantities of 2,000, those costs are $2.30 before they get freighted up to ship anywhere, right? And everybody knows that fuel costs and freight costs are not going down, right? And I used to be able to do them with film lamination for that price. Film lamination in the last several years went from 25-30 cents a unit to almost $1. Wow. I had to dump film lamination. In case a lot of people probably started to notice, a number of other people have. The prices went up. During the pandemic, paper prices went up. The jackets are substantially more expensive. Now, the royalty rates, would be surprising. But I mean, to give an example, by the time that you pay royalties and the licensing fees on a single 33, you could very typically be into between $8 and $9.
Question for you: did the artist want
No, so just stop and think about that. You're at $8 or $9 and you have nothing. You have
without manufacturing, right? Just the licensing.
Not just royalties and publishing.
Okay.
For a single 33. So then you start adding this up, right? Like you throw $2.50 at a jacket. You got center labels. You master a title, that's going to be, a couple $1,000s easily, right? So you got to amortize that out. It gets cheaper over time, but for the first couple thousand, you're at more than $1 a unit. I pay an extra 35 cents a unit. Gotta Groove uses 3 mil poly sleeves, the collector sleeves, so that nobody has to worry about removing the hype sticker and not having the hype sticker forever. That's a choice that I made. It costs extra for me to replace the stampers every 500 units. You start adding all of that stuff up and tell me what the cost of goods look like.
Not to mention the graphics guy redesigning or recreating the cover.
Yeah, that's my guys. But generally speaking, that's a one-time fee that's between $1,000 and $1,500. Mm-hmm. So you start adding all that stuff up, and you tell me how greedy we are.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question about the licensing fee, Shane. So as a reissuer, do they want you to pay that license up front before you're able to take the tapes from them, or is it just as you sell?
Boy. So the answer is a mixture. Okay. So when I first started, all the labels did these deals as what they called manufacturing deals. And what that meant was you go to them, you put a deal in place, okay, I'm going to guarantee this many units over 3 years, opening orders, this many units. I'm going to press at this pressing plant. I'm going to supply the jackets. The jackets can be shipped to the plant. So you designate all that. They would give you one all-in price per unit that would include, for me, the 180 gram vinyl. They would cover the center labels. They more often than not, oddly, would cover the hype sticker, and they would cover one-way freight to you. So Warner still works that way, and you pay. So what you typically do is you're on prepay, which means you got to pay them before they'll ship the records. Or but then I got on credit, and then it's like, okay, it's due 30 days after 30 or 60 days BOM or something like that. Now some of the market has moved toward licensing deals, and what happens with that is more like what you suggested earlier. You pay in advance, and you basically do now. So the way that it used to work is what was very typical is I would do a deal for a 2,000 unit minimum, and my opening order could be 1,000. And to your point, I'd buy 2,000 jackets, and then I would pay the label for 1,000 records. Okay. So the way that it's gone now, 3-year deal, I got to guarantee 2,000 units, and I got to pay royalties on 2,000 units up front and as in advance. So very typically into a pretty big hit before you have anything done or accomplished or anything.
So as a business person, you got to really strategically plan the title you want to ensure that you get the turnover necessary just to get your capital back from the initial.
Well, that's the point. You shouldn't do something if you think I've gotten so many titles and requests from people, things, and I look and I go, man, at premium pricing, can I sell 2,000 or 3,000 of those? Because that's the bare minimum. The 2,000 or 3,000, you're covering your expenses. Beyond that is where you actually would start to make money. I mean, you don't lose money at 2,000 to 3,000. Under 2,000, you are losing money, or at least until it comes back. So you've always got to be. Now, the other thing that's changed is that on these licensing deals, extensions of existing licenses now also require an advance. So like this year.
So hold on, repeat that for the ones that didn't hear that. So say that again.
So the way that it used to work, to your point, on a manufacturing deal, if I got a 2-year extension after my initial term is up, like Billy Squier, I've had in perpetual print, Gilded Palace since 2017-18. I want to keep these in print as long as I can, right? You do an extension. And previously, when it was manufacturing, you'd only pay when you ordered more, right? Now it's on a licensing deal, and you got to pay the 2-year advance again. And believe me, after they've been out for 7 or 8 years, they do not move at the velocity they do when they're new. I've got wonderful, recurring business with Billy Squier, with Everclear, with a number of these titles that I've had in print for a long time, Joe Jackson. But like this year, a substantial amount of my production budget is tied up in royalties for the next 2 years for stuff that I don't want to go out of print. And then you got some fun things like where there's some stuff I desperately want to keep in print, and my cost on a manufacturing deal from the label has straight up doubled. That happened recently too. And I'm very crestfallen because it's a wonderful title. It's one that sells really well. And I just look at them like, that math would work if I could sell this for $60, but it's been a $40 record.
We should start a Kickstarter campaign, Danny.
Yeah, no kidding. Sell some ABC.
There you go.
You know, yeah. And look, this business has been great to me. It's been one of the funnest things I've ever done. I'm proud of it. And I love it dearly. But seriously, it's not making me independently wealthy. It's why I've got it's why my distribution business is becoming more and more of a focus,
So Shane, you mentioned $8 to $9 licensing per title. And if they want an advance, just for people to know, if they want an advance on 2,000 copies, you're talking about 20 grand up front, basically.
Yeah, so the $8 or $9 includes publishing, so
okay.
Not all of it's the royalty. But yeah, your point is well taken. The bottom line is it's $15,000 or $16,000 just to get started.
Yeah.
So kids, if you want to start a record label at home,
I have a question for Shane. So Shane, when you decide you're going to do an all analog title, whether it's the original tape or a 1-to-1 safety copy, how does the tape get to you, and when does it go back?
Oh, well, like I said, it doesn't come to me. They're smart enough to never send tapes to my house.
They go to Kevin Gray or to Ryan Smith?
You would just leave them on the floor, wouldn't you, Shane?
Yeah. No, I've got a beautiful climate-controlled room. I would have a beautiful room full of tapes if people would send me tapes. So they get sent over to Kevin by courier, and they generally leave them for 3-4 months because more often than not, that's how long it takes for me to get in scheduled, to get mastering, and then to get through test pressings and to make sure everything's fine. So it's usually somewhere in that time frame.
And then the copies or the original masters go back to the record label immediately after that? Now, again, so, they might go back to Iron Mountain, depends on where they've got them stored. They've got storage on the East Coast and the West Coast.
Also, while we're here, we can talk a little bit of gear. We've got a few more minutes. I know, Michael, you're wearing that shirt there. What are you wearing?
I know. And when Danny, when he came to Seattle, he actually listened to SAT equipment, right?
Absolutely.
Swedish Analog Technologies, which is they make tone arms and they make the XD1 turntable that Shane distributes, correct?
So, Danny, what do you think of those SATs? I know your mark was very low on SATs when you were a young lad, but in terms of the tone arms, thoughts?
Yeah, my SATs, dude, a couple hundred on each. Look, it's unquestionable that Mark Gomez created a set of tone arms first, or a tone arm first, and then the deck came later, that really leveraged computer-aided design, computer-aided manufacturing, really deep knowledge of carbon layup, design, rigidity. Look, at the end of the day, a turntable is superficially simple, right? It's supposed to spin at 33 RPM or 45, and it's supposed to trace a groove without any deflection or adding any noise. Sounds simple, right? Well, of course it's not. And so, I think what's interesting is that he's been able to create these absolutely mind-bogglingly manufactured
How's that?
instruments, right? That, truly, until you see it in person in front of you, the level of quality, the pictures just do not do it justice. I mean, when Shane was here setting it up, and of course I'd seen the arm and the various arms that he manufactures in person before, so it wasn't quite one of those experiences, but nonetheless, seeing him take the adjust the bearings and all that, I mean, it's really something else. It's really something else. Now, of course, that doesn't come cheap. And when you factor in, the scale at which he builds these, I mean, they're not going out like Popeyes and cornflakes in the morning. The price is what the price is, right? I sincerely doubt he's making Wall Street money or hedge fund money, despite what people might think.
Or Danny Kaye money.
Or Danny Kaye money, yeah. Definitely not Danny Kaye money. So, I mean, look, I think it's amazing that Shane was able to get a hold of this brand and become a partner to Mark. I think it's equally important that he connected with a guy like Ed DeVito, who runs Ultra Audio, that has the wherewithal to really set up a system where all this stuff is on display and you can compare it and listen to it for yourself. And under exact identical test lab circumstances and conditions, right? The same cartridge, the same arms, the same turntable, different turntable, same arms, different turntable, different cartridges. And you can really hear it for yourself as to what that's doing. And if it's not doing anything for you, well, then obviously you're not the target audience for any of this. Now,
amen.
Does that mean that everything in high-end audio has an equal value? No, absolutely not. I happen to think there's a lot of bullshit in high-end audio and a lot of nonsense in high-end audio that has really, one could even argue, been a detriment to people like Mark Gomez, who really are like, dude, I'm trying to make the best damn thing I can. And here's a clown that, claims to be an engineer, this, that, and the other. And he slaps a price on this product that's equal to that, what I'm charging. And it's garbage, right? So
there's a lot of that, sadly.
There's a lot of that. So I'm not by any means saying that, $40,000 tone arm, $100,000 tone arm, it's justified. It depends. It depends on what the product is, who made it, so on and so forth. And Mark Gomez, when he says he's an engineer, he really is an actual engineer. I mean, he's worked with NASA.
He's got a degree in engineering and applied materials.
He's worked with Mercedes, serious stuff, right?
Saab, Rolls-Royce, yes.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to sound like a fanboy, but, I'm just trying to report it as I see it.
Well, value is a very interesting thing. And one of the measures of value that I learned that I still appreciate is what is the thing that costs the least amount of money that gets you a certain amount of performance improvement. And it's very interesting. I understand that what we're talking about is the upper echelon of analog aspiration. But the SAT arms really do things that I'm going to steal a line from my friend Jonathan Carr of Lyra. They do things that I didn't know could be attributed to an arm. It can make so much. What really shocks me is the difference between the SAT's entry as a $40,000 pickup arm, and what shocks me is how startlingly better it is than an absolutely stellar $20,000 arm. And the thing that I say is this: let's face it, right? Like if you when you start looking at super turntables, there are many, many turntables that are six figures $2, $3, $4, and even $500,000 that are out there. And so when you start looking at improving the performance of your system by getting a new super turntable, you're talking about spending tens of thousands of dollars, if not multiple six figures. The value proposition in a $40,000 arm is, I will say, that it will make a bigger difference on most turntables than upgrading the turntable itself, especially once you get to a certain performance level itself. And I would stand by that. And if you don't believe me, you can fly out to Ed's place and hear it for yourself. And I'll come over.
With Intervention Records.
Because honestly, well, I'll be honest, I spend, it's not just that Ed's close and Michael's over there all the time. I go over there because it sounds great. I can learn something about any gear that, I've brought lots of gear over that is being pitched to my distribution company, because Ed's place, and with Ed and Michael, it's a great place to get a performance benchmark, because I know that the front end of the system is going to deliver everything that's on the source. Mm-hmm. And then he's got some fabulous stuff to compare it to. And then the third reason is just honestly, much like the four of us discovered, it's just a hell of a lot of fun. We don't listen to bullshit audiophile records. We listen to rock and stuff that's actually, or Jesus, slack key, stuff that's just straight up fun to listen to. And I have a really good time. So I end up just going over there all the time. And he's, one of the only, Ed works on currently on evenings and weekends, which means that's my private time. He's about the only dealer who's getting my private time, just because I enjoy going over there to hang out.
Plus, once you factor in Michael the Greek's setup skills and the jar of coins that he brings along, and his wrench set. I mean, dude, talk about on the fly VTA adjustment.
Yeah, with a hammer.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And to give an example, Ed turned me on to the Tennessee Ernie Ford reissue, that analog
Feeling Blue,
the country hits or something like that. I ended up getting a copy, and that's musically, that's totally in my wheelhouse, and I love it. These guys are so into it, they go out and find an old mono copy that sounds tremendous.
Yeah.
And then another treat when we were there, Michael pulled out a Patsy Cline lacquer.
Oh, yeah.
One of those special packs, right?
1958.
Like the stuff I've done.
That I bought on eBay.
This guy's finding lacquers on eBay.
And we found some classic records, Michael
78.
78 RPM micro.
That's right.
That was fun too.
Well, here's a fun part. Here's a confession of a guy. Ed DeVito, SAT dealer, full SAT setup, 3 arms and the whole thing. Distributor sitting there. The two of us had no idea that the SAT could play 78s, and Michael knew and played a 78 for us.
I know that, Michael.
I go to the power supply, and I knew that it was so it's not in the same genre, but it was sourced off an SP10R techniques, and I knew that one had 78. I bet you they have that on there. And they did 78.26 RPM, and it was there.
Michael's not the only one sporting a logo shirt.
Oh, you're a Radio Shack guy, right?
I love Radio Shack.
Bring back Radio Shack. Bring back Candy. Realistic.
My good friend Matt Ward gets a shout out for that. He bought me the shirt, and I absolutely love it.
Shane, I wanted to also ask you, how did you get involved with Lyra cartridges? Because along with SAT, your other major brand is Lyra, Lyra, from Japan, right?
Yeah. I love answering that question. I've known the principals there for almost 25 years now, I think.
Wow.
And I got to know them when I was a reviewer in the early 2000s, because that's when I started buying Lyra cartridges. I've said this before. I am so lucky. I have managed to work with brands whose stuff that I have in my own system, and this is stuff I want. When I went from reviewing and writing onto the other side of the fence, so to speak, I was very fortunate to go to work for AudioQuest. which is another brand. I've used nothing but AudioQuest cables since the early 2000s. My good friend, obviously Bill Lowe runs the company. He's been a friend for 25 years, and Joe Harley, my other good friend. So the first time around when I was at AudioQuest from, I can't remember, 2010 or 11 to 13 or 14, we used, Lyra needed a new home for a variety of reasons. And I was there when we brought Lyra over and when they introduced the Etna and Atlas, which are still the current flagships. So that relationship continued to deepen then. And of course, I kept in touch with them in the years after I left AudioQuest. Then I went back to AudioQuest from 2019 to 22. And I ended up being, because of my relationship with them and my knowledge in analog, I ended up being the direct, the person managing the Lyra relationship on AudioQuest's behalf. 2022 came around for a variety of reasons. Again, it didn't, the bottom line is that the three of us, let's just say we were drifting apart, and what made sense for Lyra and for me was to form a new relationship and go into a very devoted, dedicated, bespoke distribution, very focused on specialty dealers and Lyra and the kind of dealers that Lyra needs. Because let's face it, right? It's one of the big things in distribution, and I've had the same thing. There are people who've approached us and we're, us and our dealer network are not the right fit for each other. A dealer network for a brand like Lyra, which is really one of the premier brands in all of audio. They've been in business for over 40 years. They're handmade, hand-built products. And the dealers who sell and service these products and service these customers have to absolutely have a set of expertise and, chops and gravitas. They've got to be the right dealers. And those things all have to come together. And Lyra, I've just got a wonderful relationship with the principals there. Stig Bjorga, the business head, Jonathan Carter, the designer, Yoshinori Mishima, the builder. So the short answer is I've known them for a long time, and I'm really, really lucky.
Awesome.
Well, in my relationship with Ed is a good example of that. The other thing I do think audio is supposed to be fun. We're not curing cancer. It's not medicine. There's not life or death. And look, I always tell people this. Don't lose sight of the fact that we get to play music for people for a living. This is a hell of a gig. And it ought to be a heck of a lot of fun.
Yep.
And I'm so fortunate. I work with people that I really, really like and care for, and have a lot of fun working with. The guys at Lyra were the first brand that believed in me in my little company enough. And they're just, they're very near and dear to my heart before we went into business together, but more so now. Mark Gomez runs a very family-oriented business. His son David now is involved in the business, who's an incredibly sharp and wonderful young man. And Mark's very dedicated and close with, his family. Those, we were talking about that earlier. In spite of all the spectacular design and other things, all of which are completely proprietary. There's, with SAT, and then Mark and his son build them by hand, and it is honestly priced to be a hand-built product that there's never going to be a lot of, for people who want the absolute best without any form of compromise whatsoever. It's interesting. Could Mark build a record player at half the price or less, or an arm? Of course he could. He's more than talented and smart enough. He doesn't want to. He doesn't want to compromise. I'm fine with that, and I'm comfortable with that section of the business. It isn't for everybody, in the same way that, Petrus is not for everybody. Shane,
I had the same discussion about 6 months ago or a year ago with with the Kaye Audio, the Claudio machine, which is $6,000. It's not cheap. I asked Peter, who made it, can you make a cheaper version? He's like, I'm not going to because I don't want to compromise. He doesn't want to make one out of plastic. He doesn't, you know?
Yeah. And to that point, as you guys can attest, Danny especially, because he slept in my guest room where my record cleaner lives, which is audio. I've had that thing for well over 10 years. I run the snot out of that thing. Danny can see there's still piles and piles of records. It's I told him, like, you're gonna have a great time in the guest room here, but as long as you don't plan on hanging any clothes up, because that's where I keep my records over. And that thing, you know, knock on wood, has never hiccuped. Peter builds a hell of a machine.
Yeah.
And the same thing with an SAT arm. I mean, and to Danny's point, I had the exact same experience. I'd seen it a few times. I hadn't seen it in several years. I've seen the arms at Michael Fremer's house. I saw the table at Munich in 2019. When you see it and feel it and get your hands on it, the substance of these things, the girth, the rigidity, the quality of the materials, I know I'm more than a little biased, but I'm just saying, anyone who has that experience, it's going to change you a little bit. Your idea of what a tone arm can be is going to change more than a little bit. And other things do feel, dare I say, insubstantial in comparison. And by the time you get up to the top line one, the yokes and the other pieces are stainless steel. The carbon arm tube has got a titanium tube inside of that for additional rigidity, mass, and constrained layer damping. They are an absolute marvel, and the build quality is really beyond anything you can imagine until you actually experience it. So,
and then let's not forget Seismion.
Of course not. Well, and that's not my other friend from India, EBI, Engineering Beyond Imagination. Guy, wonderful young man who's building a company. We're helping him do that. Fabulous ebony wood body cartridge called the Kumar, which means crazy in Indian, which is great. And then, yes, we also just think Danny's better at my job than I am. We're working with a company called Seismion from Germany, who does active isolation bases. And I did the dog and pony for Michael and Danny when they're at my place. And, to Danny's point, when you talk about building a record player is just one example. The bottom line is that, as we all know, there are a lot of us who spend money on rigid stands, isolation platforms, and things like that, because unwanted resonances or vibrations, airborne, but especially footborne, are the enemy. And this company takes a very unique approach. Rather than passive, which would be a tuned spring system, which could be pretty remarkable in its own right, their systems are active. They use super sophisticated sensors. They come and then actuators to actually self-level the platform and then keep it from moving. And this company was born in the lab environment, right? You've got super sophisticated microscopes, for example, and you're trying to use those in, in semiconductor industries, in medical and things like that. You can't have a truck drive by and shake the microscope while you're trying to look at these things. So that's the professional world, is where this company was born. But the effect that it has on audio components is startling. And to Danny's point about turntables, eliminating any unwanted resonances, these things take that to the next level. And what you end up hearing is the top and the bottom just goes like that. I mean, you hear more bass, you hear more top, you hear more dynamics, just more of everything. And it's kind of mind blowing.
Well, gentlemen, that was a lot of information tonight.
Especially at the end when you let talking.
I wanted to thank everyone tonight, all our viewers, great comments. I also wanted to thank Danny for staying up past his bedtime. I know it's late there.
It's past midnight where you are, right? Midnight, 12:20.
Well, it's 11:20, so he's got
wide
to get
awake
to bed.
now. I'm going to be playing records.
There you go.
It's Cinderella. What's going to happen to your place? What's going to happen?
Michael T, thank you. And of course, Shane for Intervention Records. When's the next big release happening? Do you have an actual possible idea?
I would tell you, if everything were to go spectacularly well, there'd be an announcement in June for a fall release. In this particular case, there are some other moving parts that are involved. The artist himself is actually working on some remixes. It's one of the unique things about this. Nice. So that's actually going to set the clock. So with the summer months being kind of dead and people being on vacation, if it doesn't end up being June, it would be September.
Now you were talking about San Francisco, right? Is that a clue?
The Bay Area.
Oh,
a little bit, but there's let's face it, there are too many artists from the Bay Area for that to be too much of a clue on purpose.
Well, thank you guys so much for a wonderful evening.
Thank you for having me.
Shane, Intervention Records, thank you again. Check out his website. Michael, thank you. Get to bed, Danny Kaye. Don't flare out. Don't do the sonic flare out tonight, okay?
Thanks for having me, bud.
All right. Everyone, thanks for watching. Wonderful as usual. Have a wonderful rest of your evening and weekend. Thank you.
My pleasure. Good night.
You all.